Super Mario RPG never released in Europe back in the day, and so the first time I got to play it was on the Wii Virtual Console, after years of seeing its characters and graphics on the internet. And it was alright, but I never finished the game. I got up to the final dungeon and then just sort of stopped. I had no motivation to keep going and beat it. However, now that the game has received a full from the ground up remake, I thought that this is the time to finally beat it once and for all. And was it better than I remember? Yes, which is kind of funny, because the game really doesn't feel any different. Obviously, that's a weird thing to say when the game is clearly different in presentation alone. Super Mario RPG has been fully remade using 3D graphics, and its music has been redone with real instruments, and this is all wonderful. The orchestral soundtrack greatly improves most of the tracks, and the option to swap between the new score and the original is always a great feature. The graphical polish is great across all aspects of the game. The environments and enemies look vastly improved while still resembling the original title. I quite like the additions to the UI that make some of the game a little easier to understand. The addition of the on-screen buttons in the Yosta Island rhythm minigame were a big help in my races against Boshi, and the choice to keep the coloured UI boxes during battles is greatly appreciated. It is amusing to me that they chose to keep the characters looking so squished though, or scrunkly as I've been calling them, even if it makes Mario and Peach look a little strange. Most of the characters look fine in this art style, especially the original ones, but there is something odd about the proportions on Mario, Peach, and the flat heads that all the Toads have. Still, it does have its charm. I do have one criticism of the presentation though, but it's part of a much wider criticism I have with this title, so I'll save it till a bit later. For now, let's move on to the gameplay and story elements. In terms of the game feel, it all feels very fluid, and I had no problems with any movement or action commands, at least problems on the game's end. My own reaction time is pretty questionable. The team have put together a very polished remake that feels fun to play and look at. The story is also enjoyable, if not a bit straightforward. It was the first of the Super Mario RPGs after all. Nowadays, it's not uncommon to see Mario team up with Princess Peach and Bowser to fight a new antagonist, but obviously back in the day this would have been pretty big for Mario fans. It's not as exciting anymore, which is a bit of a problem as the story kind of survives off of this unique value. It's not winning any awards for best script or an engaging narrative. It's all about the moments that you wouldn't get in your typical Mario platformer. In particular, the little moments that are easily missable. There's a lot of secret, hidden cutscenes or pieces of dialogue that you can find just out of the way that feel unimportant, but add to the charm of the game. It could be returning to Peach's castle to find Samus asleep in the guest room, standing on an empty spot at a wedding reception and getting your photo taken, or even acting as a priest for said wedding. There's a lot of little moments in this game that you can easily miss if you don't take the time to explore or talk to everyone, and many of these situations will likely not give you any kind of actual reward, but the experience itself is the reward. It made the world feel more alive in a way that I rarely feel with most RPG games, let alone Mario titles. And luckily, it seems like Nintendo's persistence to stick to the status quo over the last decade might have actually done this remake some massive favours. After spending so long with the generic Mario enemy and NPC designs and locations, actually getting a big shake-up with this game felt refreshing. The Toads have variation, the locales and races you meet are all unique, as is the main antagonist group and the various additional hurdles you face along the way. I didn't realise how starved I was for a shake-up to the Mario design, even if it's a shake-up that technically happened almost 30 years ago. It made the world more interesting to explore, which kept me going more than the bare-bones story itself did. Speaking of that bare bones, let's briefly touch on our two original characters, Geno and Mallow. For how much everyone loves Geno, he really is the most boring character in the squad. Yeah, he's cool and his design rocks, but his only role in this story is to inform Mario, Peach and Bowser about the importance of the star pieces, and that's it. He has no arc or anything to him beyond being cool. Mallow, on the other hand, does have a bit of a character arc as he joins Mario on a journey to find his real parents, getting braver and more heroic along the way. He's a cool little dude, and is probably the most useful party member of the bunch. I found that Mario and Mallow were constant parts of my party setup, with Bowser as the often relied upon third member. Peach and Geno would come in for specific scenarios, like if I needed to revive someone or deal a lot of damage quickly. It's a shame though that Geno didn't get anything additional added to his character in the remake to make him more compelling, but that would require changing the game in some way, and that's something these developers clearly didn't want to do. At all. And that is my big criticism of this game. It's too loyal of a remake. The original Super Mario RPG isn't perfect. It has issues in its story and gameplay, and these are problems that a remake could have fixed, but this one just didn't. Some of these problems are major, and some of these problems are so minor they might seem like nitpicks, but it all kept adding up, and eventually it started to get on my nerves. For example, the platforming. This is a Mario game, so there are some platforming sections to be had, and these are fine for the most part. But infamously, you have areas like the Beanstalk climb, where Mario has to make these really awkward jumps where depth perception is non-existent, and it ends up becoming more frustrating than fun. This was a big complaint by fans of the original as well, but it goes unaddressed here. Another example is how unclear the special attacks are in relation to the stats. The game splits the character's abilities into attack and magic, with the latter requiring flower points to pull off. This is fine on its own, but in this game they call all attacks under the flower point system magic attacks, even when they don't involve any magic at all, like Mario's ability to jump, an obvious physical attack. The Paper Mario games, which also use the flower point system, don't have this problem as they don't call these attacks or stats magic, and so an attack that looks like it should be physical focused is more easily understood to be under this umbrella. I say all this because I spent a good chunk of this game trying to make Mario's jump attack really strong, and part of that involved putting all of my stats into physical attack power rather than magic. It was only halfway through the game that I started to question if this was actually correct, because despite jumping being a physical attack, it's a special move alongside all the other magic attacks. This is a problem that could have easily been fixed by just making it clear to the player by not calling any of it magic, as that has its own connotation, something that sequels to this game realised and changed. But Super Mario RPG is so focused on being as true as possible to the original game that it made mistakes like this in its script that did impact my enjoyment of the game. Another one, and this one is a nitpick, is that they still call Kamek Whizzakoopa in this game, despite going to the effort of changing some names, like renaming Sky Troopers to the correct Paratroopers, and even updating some character models to reflect the modern designs of enemies, like is the case with Drybones. The error here is that Whizzakoopa remains intact. See, what happened in the original is that Kamek's name in Japanese is just Magikoopa, same as the species. When Yoshi's Island was first released, the localizers gave Kamek his own name, and that has stuck ever since in the West. But Super Mario RPG was translated by a different localizer who went for a more literal translation of Magikoopa, calling it Whizzakoopa, meaning Wizard Koopa. It's an easy mistake to make, but from the dialogue in this game, such as Whizzakoopa recognizing Mario as the baby from Yoshi's Island, it's clearly meant to be Kamek specifically. They even fixed the errors in the original script in order to get this reference across to the players in the West, yet they didn't change Whizzakoopa's incorrect name, and I know it only bothers me, but it's still annoying and a part of this wider issue I have with the game. An actual more major example of this problem though, comes from the cutscenes that they put into this game. For some key scenes now, the team took advantage of modern technology to have more dynamic cutscenes than what the original game got, and that's a great improvement. Unfortunately, because the original game didn't have any voice dialogue, even just grunts, that means that this remake also isn't allowed to let its heroes make any noise. What this leads to are cutscenes with dialogue being spoken but no sounds being made by anyone, and it's really awkward. Not even just pulling from Nintendo's stock sound effects for characters like Birdo. They can't make a sound because they didn't in the original. And hey, I, along with many others, criticised Pokemon Scarlet and Violet for also having awkward cutscenes where characters spoke in silence. If I criticise Pokemon for that, then I have to do it for Mario as well. And then, from a story perspective, there are parts of the original story that felt a little incomplete to me. Star Hill is an unusual place because it's the only area in the game where you collect one of the 7 stars, but without having to fight any kind of boss to do so. It just kind of happens and makes the area feel a little incomplete. There are also scenarios later on where it feels like the game is building up to some moment as something goes wrong for our heroes, only to have the problem solved basically immediately. These part of the games always felt like they were missing something, and the remake does nothing to fix that. And there are more, but I would be here all day if I listed off every single one of them, and to be fair, I don't want it to come across like graphics are the only difference in this remake. Players have access to a new super move called the Triple Attack that incentivizes the player to master the action commands, as you have to pull off consecutive successive commands to fill up the meter. The addition of a bestiary also incentivizes the use of Mallow more as a party member, as he's the only one who can fill it out with his mind reading powers, and it gives him some extra usability, seeing as he was often seen as the most useless member of the group by fans. Players can now also swap out party members mid-battle, which really helps to deal with some of the more severe status effects like Mushroom, which turns each character into a mushroom that can't do anything, which in the original game would lead to a game over. I also think this option allows for more variation in party formations and smarter tactics to be implemented when fighting tougher enemies, so I'm all here for this change, even if it does make the game a little easy. And this is something else with the game where your mileage may vary. It is incredibly easy. I had very little problems dealing with any enemy in this game, from defeating some early bosses in 2 attacks to beating the super boss the first time I reached Monstro Town. I'll admit, part of this is me understanding some of the special mechanics in the game that turn Mario into a brutal jumping machine, but overall it wasn't until the very last couple of areas that I had any reason to use any magic attack outside of healing or the odd gimmick. My ordinary standard attacks were enough to deal with most enemies and bosses in the game. The post-game, however, is a different story. A post-game is new to this remake, and it's actually quite the challenge. Almost immediately I was faced with tougher bosses that actually played with the mechanics and did something unique. It wasn't just about big numbers. These are the type of bosses I wish had been there throughout the whole game, but I am glad that they got to be in here in some form. And given that the game isn't that long, especially compared to most modern RPGs, most players won't have an issue reaching this point. Despite it all, I did really enjoy Super Mario RPG. I struggled to put the game down, and that was really because of its charm. It's just a fun game to play, even if I did think it was too easy. I loved all of the little seemingly one-off moments and pieces of dialogue that you could stumble across, and I enjoyed filling out my bestiary and other stats that the game keeps track of, like minigame scores. While I don't think Super Mario RPG is better than the Paper Mario and Mario and Luigi games that would come after it, Super Mario RPG was still a fun adventure, and I totally understand why people who grew up with this game love it so much. And as a remake, this is the ideal way to play the game. Even though I criticised it, one factor of staying so close to the original is that it doesn't give players any reason to go back and experience the original game. Heck, if you own one of the SNES NSO controllers, you can actually just play this game as if it were an SNES game. It just works. And if you've never played a traditional RPG before, this one is a pretty good one to start with. It's charming and fun, and that's all you really need. Okay, I want to thank Nintendo for sending us a copy of this game to review. I hope it does them well. I'm sure some of my criticisms in this game might seem like nitpicking to some people, and I'm fully expecting comments addressing that. But, let me know your thoughts on this and if anyone had very similar feelings to me. On screen right now are our patrons in the $5 up tier. You can figure out how to join them by looking in the description below. Let me know in the comments if this was your first time experiencing any Mario RPG. I'm curious to hear your thoughts as someone who's come into this genre without any real prior experience, at least this genre in relation to Mario. And as always, like and subscribe so that you always remember to return to the source.